I invented products that help people to walk again with Parkinson's disease. I had the pleasure to work on GPT-1 with Microsoft and Coca-Cola. So I've been in that space and race since a while, have seen it, and can confidently claim that none of the things we see out there is really an artificial intelligence.
Welcome to the Product Agility Podcast, the missing link between Agile and product. The purpose of this podcast is to share practical tips, strategies, and stories from world-class thought leaders and practitioners. Why, I hear you ask? Well, I want to increase your knowledge and your motivation to experiment, so that together we can create ever more successful products. My name is Ben Maynard, and I'm your host. What has driven me for the last decade to bridge the gap between agility and product is a deep-rooted belief that people and products evolving together can achieve mutual excellence.
Hello everyone, we're here at the Product Agility Podcast once again, and we are joined this week by a global AI leader, nonetheless, Dom Heinrich. Now, Dom is a global AI leader. He is an innovation executive at TLGG Consulting and the co-founder, no less, of the Creative AI Academy. And these are all things that we're going to be learning a little bit more about in the next half an hour to 40 minutes. Dom, thank you so much for making this time. Very early for you because you're in New York. Is that correct?
That is correct. Thanks for having me, Ben. It's early, but then not early. I'm an early bird, so it's absolutely fine. It's 8 already. It's not that
no way. Not early.
It's not that early, no.
I
already on my second coffee.
Oh my God, you're so lazy, Dom. Jesus.
Yeah. Oh, don't tell my mom. She would get really mad with me.
Oh, wait, I am not even going to make a mum joke then. We'll move on. Please move on. Now, Dom and I may seem over familiar during this episode. Just as a disclaimer, we only met last week, but we seem to get along okay. So I've got high hopes for this conversation, Dom. Now, Dom, just to set the scene somewhat for our listeners, could you introduce yourselves and tell a little bit about your background and your esteemed career and maybe how you ended up being a global AI leader?
That's a great question, Ben. I started my career in finance about 25 years ago because my parents apparently thought that working in a bank is a great idea for a creative person. And that didn't last long, as you can imagine. I founded my own company or my own agency, very much focusing on experiences and technologies very early on. So in the early 2000s, sold it and didn't get rich, just to clarify that. Not every exit is a good exit. But that was good because it made me to the career path I'm today. In the last 10 years, I built up the global innovation team for a large organization, large agency, really focusing on product and services and ventures in the technology and the AI space. And so sustainability was a big part of that as well. I invented products that help people to walk again with Parkinson's disease. I had the pleasure to work on GPT-1 with Microsoft and Coca-Cola. So I've been in that space and race since a while, have seen it, and can confidently claim that none of the things we see out there is really an artificial intelligence. Believe it or not, the humans are still more intelligent than the machines.
I was wondering over lunch with my son earlier today if he was to ask me, what is artificial intelligence, Dad? Do you know, I think I would have said something along the lines of, well, it's just a computer program that seems to be able to think for itself at times. And I thought that's probably a really crap explanation. So maybe at some point in this conversation, Dom, you can give me a better answer for my son.
I will try.
Maybe that is not a decent place to start, actually. But not a decent place, actually a decent place to start, just as to set the scene, because I think a lot of people talk about AI, and I think a lot of the listeners will be using things like ChatGPT and with all these terms bounded around. And before we get into really the meat of this topic, this conversation for today, which will be around innovation and AI and around how we can deal with some of the challenges that we find in organizations that are using products and Agile with design functions, maybe could you give us that short little pitch as to exactly how you would describe AI?
Yeah, I would love to. I mean, none of what we see out there is AI. There's no artificial intelligence. It's just an easy term to use for all of us. And the machine doesn't think itself, right? It sits there, it waits until you prompt it. It's not sitting around and thinking, what will Ben ask me today? it's great. It doesn't think. So imagine, Ben, maybe it would be beneficial for a lot of us humans sometimes not to think. So, but to answer your question, imagine it's a very great mathematic algorithm that can predict words, and the better your words that you are inputting in the machine, the better the output will be, because it understands the context of what you're putting in. And it's then calculating what the most likely answer is. And it's becoming so good because it has a large amount of data, and it basically went to school for many 100 years and learned everything that's out there, which we maybe are not be able, or as we said earlier, Ben, maybe too lazy for.
Thank you very much for that. That is very useful. That's very useful, and it satisfies my curiosity, and I will be able to explain it to my child much better. Because I did think that it doesn't really think for itself, and it is waiting for a prompt. But that's not talk about
so we can be very lucky that they're still not thinking. I mean, they're aiming for that, right? Companies like Meta, like OpenAI, they're aiming for the so-called artificial general intelligence, which means the machine would be able to think. I'm not sure we want that. We're already confused by human thinking. How do we handle artificial thinking in the future? But in simple terms, just keep in mind when you work with these machines, A, they understand human language, which means that becomes the new user interface, which is really interesting what this means for us in innovation in the future and how we will interact with machines. So the human-machine relationship is a big topic. And keep in mind, they don't know what they don't know. So if you put something in, you don't explain it properly, the output will be crap. And I think that's a slightly hopeful or hopeless romantic perspective on it, that we get forced by the machines to put better inputs in, explain things better. It makes us maybe better in explaining things and talking to each other among humans. Imagine that. I'm more on the positive side that the machines can make us better. That's my hope.
Yeah. I am aligned with you on this, Dom. I think it could be a boon for us to not tire ourselves with the mundane and the prosaic, and actually let the machines do some of that, given its vast data that it has. And then we can add on the things on top, the things that do require our own thinking, our own imagination. So then how does this work with, say, product management or the world of product? Because we've got AI and we're talking about innovation and we're talking about product management. Like, what role then can AI play when it comes to innovation in product?
Let me ask you something. I would be super curious. I wanted to ask you this last time when we had our prep. In your role, and I think you explained it so nicely, what have you ever experienced among the product people and the design and tech people, which was a hurdle, where you had a real challenge? What was a real barrier in that relationship for you?
The real barrier over time, because I spent most of my career working in organizations and still working in organizations that have had a strong kind of agile focus, and are now trying to move towards more of a product mindset and having like a more of a customer-centric view of their world. And one of the things that I think that people have always found, organizations have found difficult, is how do you get various silos actually collaborating together well? There's never been anything which is there's never been a mutually beneficial reason for people to give up something to then work with somebody else. And as a consequence, there's always been very severe handovers between, say, design, product, and engineering, let's say. So I think it's that collaboration between different silos within an organization, and there's like that kind of psychological in-group and out-group type phenomena. I don't want to deal with them because they're not part of my group.
I love that you bring this up, because, Ben, I agree. We always experienced this in our work relationships in the past years. And I think that's exactly how we approach or should approach AI. It's like, what are our barriers and our behaviors and hurdles where AI can actually help us overcome them? And so I think in your particular instance, and we've been there and have discussed that many times, probably in everybody who is listening to this, innovation means something different for everybody. Product means something different for everybody. Certain words are just a or different interpretation for a tech person than for a designer or for a product leader. Even agile means something different for certain people.
Absolutely.
And I think that's the beautiful part. Imagine you go into a machine and say, this is my transcription of the meeting today. create me 3 versions, one for a designer, one for a tech person, one for the project manager, so that everybody understands what to do and speaks in their language. And you can actually level up that game by feeding an AI with certain behavioral knowledge about this person because you work with them. And there's great tools out there where you can do this and can actually get from their LinkedIn profile their personality insights. So that's a way how I think technology will just help us bridge the gap in communication and will help us understand each other better and therefore hopefully create a better outcome when it comes to agility and moving fast and moving really agile and through a product lifecycle.
Here's a challenge then. If we take that example where we're putting, say, some meeting notes or maybe like a transcription, which would be quite neat, right? And maybe there's a tool that takes transcription and then we'll give an understanding of behavioral profiles and the types of people that are there. We'll then make a different version for each of them. I can see if that would be beneficial, but I see that more as like a ferry than a bridge, if that makes sense. Because what we're not doing with that is creating that shared nomenclature, that shared language, which can be really important. So whilst there is some things that maybe we would never create a shared language around. Project managers will always want to call that, and product managers always want that. Then if we did just kind of get AI, I know this is a silly example, but we could extrapolate it out to then, we give it something and then it ferries back individual versions for those types of people. Then are we not running the risk of not having the conversations and really looking to seek and understand each other and create that shared language, which is so important to create that shared understanding?
So Ben, I have 2 answers to your question and to your challenge. The first one is my probably rigor New York answer. Is like, I need to move fast and I throw money against the problem. And if everybody understands what need to be done is that gets us move faster and be more efficient, then that's great. I give you my honest answer. In the field, I feel you're absolutely right. I think maybe I didn't do a good job in explaining it. I think understanding each other, machines can actually help us. If I gain insights how somebody understands a topic and help me understand how to explain that better to this person, but at the same time, the machine basically crafting this for me, that will definitely bridge gaps and it will bring us together. So of course I can take it, and the efficient part of me says, take it in, send it out, make sure that everybody gets the same notes and in their words and language they understand. But of course, there is the possibility sitting in a meeting together and basically sensing the tone of voice. And that we have tensions because somebody talks about a certain word in a meeting. We all had that yesterday about something simple like branding. What's the difference between branding and naming? There is a difference, right? And there's a massive difference. And when you talk with product people, they feel like, oh, I need to brand my product. No, you need to name your product. Branding is what it looks like and what your company is. But that's subtle nuance. If you can, instead going down a rabbit hole for 10 minutes and talking about this, imagine this could intersect in the moment we speak about it. And be a part and level us and make sure, hey, hold on a second, Ben. Hold on a second, Dominic. This is what you're talking about. This is what it means to you. This is what it means to you. Maybe you want to find a common ground. And we built a product like this, by the way, Ben.
Oh, really?
Back in my days, yeah. In the last company I worked for, we built a product on Microsoft Teams that's basically, and now it's getting scary, I know, a little bit creepy, but you had to opt in to do that, but it's listening in, understands the sentiment of the conversation, gives me a feedback if I maybe should wait and ask a question because I talk 70% of the time, or it understands the words I'm using and is understanding that my language is maybe not correct. And so I think there is ways where we are going towards where machines will be a part of us, right? And AI will be seamlessly integrated in our life. And that's going to be exciting. It will help us bridge these gaps. This was a long answer, Ben, but maybe a little bit of it sounds a little bit sci-fi, but everything I said is technically possible already. We could do that.
Yeah. There's a huge amount of things that are technically possible. Doesn't mean like the people are using more will use and more we're not just not using them yet. What I find really
it's not
interesting...
designed. It's not designed the way we should use it. No, it's like there's barriers. Like, that's why people put cones on self-driving cars to stop them.
What I find interesting with what you're saying is that you're almost talking about like AI facilitation there, because the role of good facilitation is to hear for those differences and understanding, to help people gain that clarification. And the one thing that we know is that, and I'm going to say this as an absolute, is that most meetings and workshops are shit, because they don't get facilitated. There isn't equal voice. The quiet person never gets to speak up about it. We did a webinar on this recently, talking about how do you get the quiet person to speak up. And not every workshop, not every meeting can afford to have a skilled facilitator there to put the work in at the beginning and then put the work in the session as well. So what you're saying around AI perhaps giving us the prompts and some clues and some ideas as to how to make the meeting flow effectively is quite fascinating. I think where my brain kind of comes to a halt, and maybe not something I want to explore now, but how do those interrupts happen? And I think that's more of a solution, it's more of an implementation problem than it is a fundamental conceptual one.
Absolutely.
So what if then we're in a situation where we have lots of silos in the organization, and we've got design department, design and research, let's say, and they're doing some fantastic work, which just kind of goes unnoticed or unheard of by the marketing department, because they're just head down, arse up, working on what they've got to work on, trying to make sure that it's all lined up and probably overlapping, doing some of the similar work. And then you've got engineering who are just being lambasted because they're late and the stuff that has come out is buggy and it isn't really quite what the product manager envisioned. And then you've got product who are trying to kind of bring all this together, dealing with senior stakeholders, dealing with the market, trying to get it all lined up, trying to make sure that the thing that goes out is a success, right? It's a nightmare. Is there a situation or any tools out there that you know of where, given some contextual information, it could actually begin to produce some measures, like some metrics, which would encourage that system to work more as one rather than as those four distinct parts?
It's super interesting that you bring this up. I build a system that is aiming towards that direction. It comes from the fundamental product process. Remember, the double diamond is a very famous one of what many organizations use because it's easy to understand. Imagine it becomes a single diamond. And the first thing you do is you training a model, a data model with your data, with your knowledge, what you're trying to accomplish. It's very fact-based. You're training it on your personas. You're creating basically synthetic personas. You're training it on your synthetic company. So what's my company's goals? We humans are all driven by motivations. The marketing department has a motivation to, some of them probably win awards, but to actually make sure they have a great brand awareness and a campaign and work with the biggest influencers and social media experts and whatever. The product team and the research team, they want to build a great product that's human-centered, right? And that's unseen. Maybe the research team in particular, they're very keen on finding this new nugget. They're maybe too technology-driven sometimes and missing the piece of, is it actually solving the problem? And so imagine you put all this in a model. That's the first time you spend. It's your beginning of the new diamond. And then this model works in coexistence with you through all the departments and simulates and anchors it back to the model. So is it actually solving the problem? Is it benefiting our company? Is it fulfilling our requirements on how much money we need to spend, et cetera, et cetera? And that, I feel like it's almost like a stingray. It's like it goes a little bit out there because the human interaction and intervention and iteration comes more in when the simulation is getting closer to a final product. The benefit of doing it that way is because it removes emotions and assumptions and makes it based on facts. And it does a constant product market fit for you and a problem solution fit for you in an iteration. All the time you work in and all the time you give in more information, it actually gets it closer to not sticky notes and some crazy ideas or a great marketing campaign. It gets it that everything perfectly fits together. That's what we're teaching at PRATT University, by the way, as an AI design course.
So my friend David Pereira the other day put an article out on LinkedIn or a post on LinkedIn saying, is the future of product management just AI? Will there be any role for product managers? And so what you're saying there, and I'm going to let's roll with it. One of the traits you'll see in me is I do like to blow up things to extremes to kind of test our hypotheses a little bit, right? So, but I'm not going to do it in this instance. Let's roll with it, right? And what you're saying, because the things I would like to pick at, but let's roll with what you're saying. What will be the role then for product managers? And even then, to a point, will this then take up some of the engineering effort as well over time, do you think?
Yeah, I think the role of the product manager was always misunderstood because they're actually really creative people and they really have most of them who are really good have a great technology background. So I always worked with product managers where I felt they were actually the only ones in the room who understood both sides. It's like the human-centered design and what we're trying to accomplish for a product perspective, but also the technology side in order to accomplish it. And I think their role will be actually becoming more important instead of going away, because that understanding of what I look at and what I'm building and training the model and making sure it's accurate is actually a big role to play. I believe it is actually not removing that. I think we will other areas see in a different light, but I'm generally not thinking that AI will replace people. I think it will make us think more critically about things and challenge things, to your point. Mm-hmm. So we will get a different kind of role, but the product role will stay the same. Yeah. I see in your face you don't believe me, so
no, that's my thinking face.
That's
because I had a thought, and then I had another thought, and I'm like, oh bugger, what was the first thought? Now the first.
Imagine that you would have a connection to an AI in your brain. We're not going there.
No, well, but my level of intelligence is always up for debate, Dom. Let's not assume anything here. I need all the help I can get. However, my first thought was then around, well, actually, we talk about product managers. There's a difference between managers and leaders. I was looking at a post by someone I know called Andre Albuquerque, who was talking about the future role of product management and saying that a lot of the things that he suggested seem to be kind of more boring management-y type things, right? Because the difference between management and leader, right? Leader, you're doing something new and different and people want to follow you. If you're then also very good at managing people and doing a lot of that corporate or organizational management stuff as well, fantastic. I was always shocking at some of that stuff, having new ideas and being like, oh, come join me on this new idea. I could do that. But actually then doing the management-y piece, I really struggled to do that. So I wonder then with what you're saying, well, because then I began thinking, okay, there's that element of project manager, product leader, but then there's also an element here about scaling. And one of the things that I see very often is it's one of my pet annoyances in many respects. And nothing against the people that are in these roles, but when you see the role of the product owner in an organization and it's just a team level analyst, they're not doing any owning or management of the product. They're just doing the analysis on behalf or with the team. And that's a really valuable role and skill that really needs to happen a lot of the time. And maybe AI helping there would be really quite fascinating and I think could really accelerate things. But for me, that isn't what a product owner is about. So when people talk about product owner and how does a product owner role scale, when you have to spend all of your team working with detail, I'm thinking, well, maybe AI helps those people to move away from some of that detail. And then it all coalesced in my mind somewhat to the question, which is how can AI help people scale their product management and agile engineering efforts?
It's a great question. I think, as I said, right, it's like the simulations you do. I think I need to pause for a second before I answer your question. You said something extremely powerful. The difference between being really good at your job and managing people, that will become bigger and different in the future. That I think it will become more seen as a skill, because we have a lot of people who go in certain roles and then suddenly and really are really good at their job, but frankly, they're not good in managing people. And that leads to a great career in their job to become miserable, right? And they become miserable. And I think we will see that differently. We will see a switch in that. People managing might go back even more, because imagine it's about bringing things together and make them work, as you said, right? It's like make sure that everything works the right way. I think coaching will become a bigger part in the future around that. And so before I go off in a rabbit hole, going back to answer your question, I think what the AI will be able to do is it will help you scaling things up by simulating things. So while you will be able to do one product, just imagine it helps you to do a multitude of products at the same time, achieving the same thing you did over years in a faster amount of time, maybe in a few months, because it simulates everything through. And then
you can simulate the testing of multiple hypotheses concurrently.
Already. Exactly. As one of the things, if you train the model properly, if you're really good at your job, if you're a really good designer, a really good product manager, if a really good technician, all these things, if you train that model really well, all the simulations, all the testing, all the things we are usually running through with human assumptions, right? And we do these user interviews and trying to figure out, is this what we are building really successful? Imagine this is simulated. And then your job becomes a different one, becoming challenging it, becoming critically thinking about it, right? It's like you have a different role suddenly. But if you're talented in what you're doing, that will elevate the work you're doing, and the output will be more successful. I think we will see more innovations that go to market and die much earlier. So companies will spend probably the same amount or should spend the same amount in their R&D departments than they do now, but the results and the output will be significantbly higher, and the impact will be bigger.
So you've been involved in but it sounds like pretty kind of groundbreaking and really interesting AI projects. Can you think of which one in particular had the biggest positive impact on a customer?
Yeah, two actually, but two touched my heart the most. The first one is we built a platform that allows people to use gestures to communicate with a smart home assistant for Amazon. And the platform is called Sign, and it allows people with hearing disabilities to use sign language to interact with voice assistants. Suddenly they can go to something profound for us, go to a McDonald's drive-thru and use sign language to actually communicate. And that's really, working with these people was really opening my perspective on how we design products and how fortunate we are sometimes and ignorant at the same time. We're walking through the world and designing products. Because voice, and we're back to this topic, I think voice will become really dominant in the next few years. Humane, the new AI pin, is going in that direction. The Rabbit One, it's like everything goes in that direction. So what do we do with people with hearing disabilities? So I think that platform was definitely one of the projects that touched my heart the most.
Yeah, that's really, it's ridiculous. It's one of those things that seems so obvious. And I was wondering, you have Google Translate, which, when my children like Beyblades and they get them from Japan and they're all Japanese boxes. So we use Google Translate to see actually what the hell the instructions are. I haven't seen, I'm not aware of, I hope that there is the equivalent app for sign language. So that people can sign into a camera and then it will give you an explanation of what that person's saying, because it must be an incredible challenge. I was trying to think of ways that my dad was disabled, couldn't walk, and I never knew him standing up. And I wonder how much easier would his life be now? If he was still around, how much different his life would be because of the products that could have been created, particularly the technology-based products that could have been created to help him lead an easier life. I wouldn't say more fulfilling, perhaps, but an easier life, because shit's difficult when you have and I hate the word disability, but when you have a difficulty, a difference, which the world isn't designed for you. And I'm with you that if there's AI, anything that can help with that surely is a positive.
Yeah, keep in mind it's 11% of the population globally living with any sort of disability. So if you design from their perspective first, if you build a product out of that perspective, you will probably build a better product in general, because it helps us too. There's certain moments in life where I don't want to sit at home and say, okay, Google, lights 30%. Maybe I just want to make a gesture, right? And so it has not just an impact on people with disabilities, it has an impact on us. And I think that's where we talk a lot about technology, Ben, in the first few minutes, but it's really about experiences, and it's about how we engage with the digital infrastructure. And I think we are so focused on, oh God, there's this new thing that can do these things. It excites me so much. We totally forget about, do I need this? Do I need to do this? Do I need to make my company now an AI company because everybody is telling me that? Or is there a better solution? To your point, maybe I should educate my managers and create a coaching culture in the organization. Maybe that's more beneficial and bridges the gaps between my departments. I know this is contradictory to what I said in the beginning, but I think there's always a balance between human and machines and human and AI in the relationship to find.
So this feels like it segues nicely, because we're talking about some serious topics onto ethics. And I think of, and anyone that's listened to my episodes with Shane Hasty in particular will know that when it comes to coaching, code of ethics, I am a big fan of the International Coach Federation, the ICF. Their code of ethics I find very robust and very good for people in a coaching type situation. I think that when it comes to agile coaching, and I would lump product coaching in this as well, there isn't yet a really widely recognized and followed code of ethics. So lots of the agile coaches out there, and I suspect sorts of product coaches as well, will by accident act in unethical ways. Now, when, say, people are using AI to help them with their coaching, perhaps, and maybe they're going down an unethical route, I suspect a lot of AI models out there, AI programs, would be kind of not giving you unethical advice, which is maybe one way in which AI is slightly more ethical than perhaps some humans, just because of its vast knowledge, vast understanding of what ethics really means and that whole environment. So when we think about, there are some ways where maybe AI could make us more ethical. What do you think of the big ethical challenges that are facing product managers and agile people in the future with their usage of AI?
One of the things you just said is probably the big challenge. What is ethical to you, to me, to anybody else? And I think we live in a society where we see a lot of double standards, and we see a lot of people setting the tone of what is ethical and not. But people are different, and people have different perspectives. And I think training an AI model on your ethics means you're training it on your biases. And I'm not judging them, right? I'm not saying this is good or bad biases. I think there's certainly absolutely bad ones. That shouldn't happen. But the nice part is, since it becomes so widely accessible and people will use it, it also will uncover the flaws much quicker than before, right? And biases will be, if something is trained in a certain way ethically, that is maybe ethically wrong, it will have a problem. So to your point, if I rely on a machine to give me guidance, and that's why I'm very hesitant around coaching. I know a couple of coaches from Hudson Institute, which is one of the co-founders of the ICF, as you probably know. And I think what's so interesting is they have a standard they set in place. And let's assume this is a good standard and we train an AI model and everybody uses it. There might be a different culture who sees that completely different and might not agree with that. So the question is now, then if I'm using it and somebody calls me out on it and says that's incorrect and I feel offended or I don't feel treated well, how do we handle that? Because the default can't be the machine told me.
And I think this is where we get into the nuance of it. Because if you look at something, say, I don't know, let's make something up, the product coach's code of ethics. And that will outline certain things. And but this is an unregulated environment. There is no central regulated governmental body that's going to come along and say, you can't do that, you can do that. We're not talking about war crimes here, but we're talking about things that could damage individuals, institutions, livelihoods. And so there'll be a group of people who get together and decide what that is. Same way the ICF did it, same way it's done for Agile coaching. At some point, it'll probably happen for product coaching as well. And then people will gravitate towards that and say, well, given this context and given my role, then I look at this and this is something I can get on board with. The danger then comes with these, if you train AI on codes of ethics and it becomes this big homogenous blob, let's say, or just this big code of ethics AI tool out there, then you're right. I think that it will become absolutely useless because it's not bound within the context that people will bring to it. Does that make sense? So I can kind of see if the ICF or it got together and like, oh, well, let's pump in our code of ethics into some AI tool, and let's use this to help assess some of the situations that we're being faced with and maybe give us a slightly more objective view. I can see that as being useful, but I agree if it just becomes one person's bias, or it's the bias is being looking to be applied in a situation where it isn't perhaps contextually relevant, then it could cause some damage.
I think what you said is absolutely amazing, because I think that you carved out the benefits of it, right? And it's like, let's say we have a system that we teach it on, then it becomes valuable. But to your point, it's one bias, yes, but we have the unconscious bias as well. And let's say we are 10 white men in a room and we think what we are establishing now is perfect. I would argue a lot of women might not agree with us. And now we are maybe adding a couple of white women. Now, this goes on and on. And so I think that's the tricky part of it, right? I'm absolutely for regulations, but I think the question is, who do you put together in certain instances for these ethical questions who have no bias, which is impossible, but at least create a set of diversity that is valuable. And I think that's where I don't believe that machines will take over humans, because we will always need, if everything is just rationally following a code, then we probably miss what makes us human. This is the nuances of it and understanding these subtle differences in the right moment, in the right context, which might be different. No matter what I set as a human in ethical requirements, it might just not come across that way or should be executed that way in that instant or in that moment. And the machine will not know it. It will just follow the code and will give you a recommendation.
I'm wondering, Dom, that we should probably begin to draw this episode to a close, because we're hitting the upper limit of how long we're to keep episodes. I've still got a ton of questions I'd like to ask. So maybe I'll ask you them offline, or maybe we'll find some other way to get those answered. Perhaps you could come and do a live stream with us, Dom. We could field some questions from our listeners and a broader audience. Perhaps we'll look to get that arranged in the next month or two. So everyone, make sure you keep your eyes peeled on LinkedIn and Instagram for some information, or maybe when that will be happening, if Dom agrees when we stop recording. And I want to give people something practical, Dom. So I'm wondering if you could give one challenging, practical tip or provocation for a product person or for an agile person, or both, in how they can use AI today. What is your provocative and challenging tip you could provide to them?
Don't use AI. Let me explain. My recommendation is always understand the motivation of the person that is in front of you, and then use AI to rationalize it from a product perspective. Because exactly how we started the conversation, it was around that we have misunderstandings or misconceptions, and everybody follows their own. As you said, the marketing team is already off building a campaign while the others are trying still to figure out how to solve the problem. And I think if you think about what everybody's motivation is, and then using that information and feeding it and have a rational consensus about it, so asking the machine, hey, look, these are all the motivations. This is what I try to accomplish. What's the rationality of it and how do I accomplish it? You will probably get really good recommendations and a less biased answer from the machine. And I think that from a practical standpoint, sometimes we make assumptions based on the conversations we had. And if I put these assumptions in and ask a ChatGPT 4, so the premium version, to rationalize that for me and filter out all the human emotions between it, you usually get a really good answer that is less biased and less assumptionist than it was before.
It reminds me of non-violent communication, talking about the things that you can observe rather than it also reminds me of, I'm talking about my kids a lot by doing homework with my children this morning, and one of the questions was, can you pick out 2 words or phrases which tells you that this was a horrible journey? And it was talking about a Roman soldier. And the 2 words seem to be violently regarding the weather, but also then the word horrendous. And I was like, well, actually, the violent waves lapping over, that's something you could, violent is it's a subjective label on it, but at least then it's talking about the waves lapping over, that's something which could be recorded and you could see. To say it was horrendous and that be the other word, it isn't a factual statement, that's just somebody's opinion. And if you were to run that through an AI, ChatGPT-4, for example, as they just give me the facts of this, it probably wouldn't come back and say it was horrendous because that isn't a fact. That's just a subjective opinion. And what you're saying is if we can use ChatGPT or other models are
Bard,
available,
Claude,
Bard, whatever it may be, but to actually, we've had a difficult conversation. We're going to have a difficult conversation. Can you help me generate a different perspective on this?
Exactly. And I think that's extremely powerful. There's a great book, The Unseen Motivations, or Unheard Motivations, which is talking exactly about that. It's like, how do I can change my perspective in the room? I walk in a room and I have an agenda, right? And I try to present a new product and want to get everybody rallied. And one person in the room challenges me around the way I do the presentation. Suddenly, my personal motivation of showing the product changes to convincing the other person that I have a great presentation, which means the way I walked into the room is different to the conversation I'm having. So, and that's, how do I balance that? And I think in these moments, this is a real-time example, right? How do I do this in a real-time moment? But sometimes taking a breath, walking out of the room and saying, give me 1 second, I need to take a breath, is absolutely fine. By the way, I think that's ethically what we all should do and embrace a little bit more. Think a moment about it. Maybe ask a ChatGPT, a Bard, a Claude, any of these tools about how to approach this. And you might get a different perspective and you might walk back into the room and it will maybe solve the problem in that case, that the tension is gone because you acknowledge, hey, the presentation is maybe not looking how you expected it. Let's talk about the product and let's make sure that the next time we change the presentation in that way. And I think that's where I see the power in terms of behaviors and behavioral changes that AI can actually help us with.
And I think if a lot of us don't get on that bandwagon and start using it in that way, we'll be left in the dust.
Yeah,
that's my personal opinion. I just think that I can hear certain people saying, "Oh, but we're humans and we should be able to deal with it, but we don't deal with it. We're pretty shit. We're pretty shit at relationships and we're pretty terrible at meetings and speaking honestly. And we leave and we're like, why was that meeting crap? Why didn't such and such speak their mind? Why is no one going to do the actions that came out?" Well, if we could just take a moment and just get a bit of advice, from a third party, then we would do that, surely. And the fact is, in our pockets, we've got that third party with more knowledge than we could even begin to comprehend, who's waiting for us to ask it questions that we don't even know are questions yet. And so I think that if we don't get on this bandwagon in some way, shape or form, I think that other people will, and they will overtake us. So Dom, thank you so much for this opportunity to get to explore this. I think it's been a wonderful conversation, and it's nice to have such an esteemed member of the AI community such as yourself come and grace this podcast with your presence. So thank you very much. If people want to learn more about you, of course, they can go on LinkedIn because, who doesn't go on LinkedIn, unfortunately? Is there anywhere else that people could look to find out more about you?
I think LinkedIn is a good place to start. You will find me there, Dom Heinrich, and very easy, and then connect with me and you will get all the websites from TLGG to Creative AI to PRATT University. Everything you need to know, you will find there.
And there's so much we didn't talk about. We didn't talk about PRATT University. We didn't talk about TLGG. We didn't talk about the Creative Academy. So maybe, we will pick some of that up on the live stream. And we are also going to record an episode on sustainability. So Dom, thank you very much for coming along. Everybody,
thank you so much.
You Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you all again very soon.